Before uniting against the Viking threat in the late 9th century, the main Anglo-Saxon kingdoms of Wessex, Mercia, Northumbria, and East Anglia were often rivals. These kingdoms were independent states with their own kings, armies, and ambitions. Their conflicts stemmed from territorial disputes, control over trade routes, and the struggle for overlordship. The title of Bettwalder, which also means wide ruler, carried prestige and political dominance. Northumbria and Mercia frequently clashed over influence in the Midlands, while Mercia and Wessex contested borderlands over the Thames Valley. East Anglia, though smaller, was often drawn into alliances or wars to protect its autonomy. They face raids from external threats, but never seek each other's support to avoid being in debt to other rulers, or tricked into losing their regional relevance. The Vikings were their common enemies, but they never felt any need to seek each other's help, because if they couldn't win, they would bribe. Their knowledge of the Vikings was to raid, loot, get their longships, and return to the north. After their first raid in Lindisfarne, the Vikings discovered something. Their enemies have gold, precious goods, livestock, and most importantly, they are defenseless, which constitutes a consistent raid of all 4 countries with no military strength to keep them in check. Even though these countries are powerful and civilized, their inability to come together against a common foe left them vulnerable to begging or bribing to survive. But everything is about to change because these Northmen are now changing their purpose of attack. They are no longer interested in looting, stealing gold, livestock, and taking slaves. They want a more permanent invasion. By the mid-9th century, due to a combination of opportunity and necessity, decades of raiding had revealed the wealth and fertility of the English land, making permanent control more appealing than seasonal looting. Political fragmentation among the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms meant there was no unified defence offering an opening for long-term settlement. Also, the Scandinavians are getting overpopulated with limited resources to survive, so the best solution is to find a more natural and wealthier settlement to thrive. Overwintering in captured towns taught them the strategic value of fortified bases, while success in earlier raids proved that conquest was both feasible and more profitable. This shift transformed Viking warfare from hit-and-run coastal attacks to deliberate campaigns aimed at ruling territories, collecting tribute, and integrating into the political landscape of the conquered lands. This is what England cannot allow. In the autumn of 865 CE, word spread along the windswept coasts of East Anglia that the Northmen had not returned to their longships, but instead pitched their dark, sprawling camp inland, and a chill greater than winter settled over the kingdoms of England. For decades, the raids had been terrible yet predictable. A flash of sails on the horizon, fire in the villages, gold and cattle seized, monks cut down or dragged away. And then, by the turn of the season, the invaders gone, riding the cold sea back north. Every king knew that they would not stay, and that the certainty made bribery a convenient solution. But this was different. They came in greater numbers, with women, children, and wagons, and their ships laid anchored in the estuaries like sleeping beasts. They meant to stay. In the royal hall of East Anglia, King Edmund's advisors and generals argued late into the night. Generals are quick to sense the intention of these Northmen by their numbers, no matter how insane they could be. They don't risk the life of their wives and children. So why bring them to war, if not to make it an abode? The idea of the Northmen living across the street is a heavy pill to swallow, because they have always been enemies who take whatever they want without asking for permission. This indicates one thing: they are tired of plunder and are now ready to take the land itself. So the first suggestion for unity came not from Wessex or Mercia, but from a lesser-known general of East Anglica, a man whose estates lay near the sea and who had lost kin in the last year's raids. He stood before King Edmund and said, "My lord, we cannot stand alone. If these men of the north come to stay, they will swallow us one by one, as the wolf takes lambs from the edge of the flock. But even the wolf thinks twice when the flock gathers together." His words drew a murmur, half scoffing, half thoughtful. Unity was a bold notion, almost unthinkable for the proud kingdoms of the English. Still, the thought lingered. But it wasn't even East Anglia that brought the England Union to heed. Around the time that the coalition was still nothing but whispers in Edmund's court, Northumbria was at war, not with the Northmen, but within its own ruling house. They were in political chaos, having two kings ruling one single kingdom. Aella ruling the south part of Northumbria Deira, while Osbert ruling the northern part, Bernicia. The Vikings find Northumbria an easy target to conquer this time, a divided city with no definitive ruler. So they attacked and took the city of York in Northumbria in 866 CE. The city fell swiftly, its gates forced by a sheer momentum of a force that had been gathering strength for over a year. York's defences, once formidable, had been neglected amid the chaos of Northumbria's civil war. For months prior, the kingdom had been divided between two rival kings. Their armies had bled each other in skirmishes and border raids, leaving the realm vulnerable when the Norse struck. The Vikings wasted no time securing the city, fortifying its streets and walls, and establishing it as a winter base. The Anglo-Saxon population was subdued under the threat of the axe, and the Norse leadership prepared for any retaliation that might follow. Through the bitter winter of 1866 to 1867 CE, Aella and Osbert remained helpless in mutual distrust. Both had suffered losses at the hands of the invaders, but neither was prepared to submit to the other's authority. Reports trickled in from scouts and refugees. The Vikings were strengthening York's gates, reinforcing its ramparts with timber and earthworks, and stationing watchmen along the Ouse. The Norse had made no move to advance further south. It was this pause, this entrenchment, that convinced many in Northumbria that the foreigners did not intend to leave at the turn of the season. They were settling in, making York their new home. As winter turned to early spring, the political deadlock broke. Aella and Osbert at last agreed to join forces. It was driven by desperation, pressure from the nobles, and the fear of losing the kingdom entirely. But the outcome was unexpected. Two rival armies, once enemies, would now march together. Messengers were detached across the kingdom to rally every thane and levy that could be spared. The goal was not simply to harass or blockade, it was to storm York and drive the Vikings into the Ouse. In early March of 1867 CE, the Northumbrian host advanced. The combined force of Aella and Osbert's armies was formidable, though still smaller than the Viking garrison. They moved quickly, hoping to catch the Norse before their defences were complete. Approaching York, they find the city bristling with fortifications, gates reinforced with heavy timbers, narrow streets lined with barricades, and archers positioned along the walls. This would be a fight to the death. The attack began at dawn. Northumbrian infantry surged towards the gates, while the others scaled ladders against the walls. The Vikings met them with a barrage of arrows, spears, and stones. Fighting was fierce at the gates, where shield walls crashed together and men were cut down in the crush. At some point during the day, the Northumbrians broke through. They know the weakest part of the city, so they attacked there, which allowed the Northumbrian warriors to pour into the city. The battle inside the walls was brutal and chaotic. The narrow streets nullified much of the Northumbrians' numerical advantage, and the Vikings, experienced in urban fighting, used the terrain to deadly effect. Fires broke out, which had been set deliberately to slow the Northumbrian attackers, and smoke choked the air. Both sides fought with ferocity, knowing that the fall of the city meant the death or exile of the losers. In the heart of the melee, Aella and Osbert fought alongside their men, pressing towards the Viking command. But the Northumbrians had underestimated the depth of the Viking trap, because the Northmen had feigned weakness at the walls, drawing the attackers into the city centre before counterattacking from multiple directions. In the confined space, the shield walls of Aella and Osbert's troops were broken apart. Street by street, the Northumbrians were driven back. Somewhere amid the fighting, both kings were struck down. Their bodies lay among the countless dead. Leaderless and disorganised, the remaining Northumbrian forces tried to flee. Many were cut down in the attempt, others threw down their arms and surrendered. The Vikings held the field, their grip on York now unshakable. The capture of the city was no longer just a military occupation, it was a transfer of power, with both kings dead. This was a clear message to other nearby kingdoms that the Vikings are here to stay. The attack and seizure of York drives fear into the bones of the remaining Anglo-Saxon kingdoms. It's either they unite or lose their kingdom. The aftermath was grim. The city did not return to Anglo-Saxon hands for nearly a century. Their victory over the Northumbria's rival kings, Aella and Osbert, ended the kingdom's independence in a single brutal campaign. But the Vikings were not content with the contemporary occupation. They fortified York and made it their capital, ruling it as the heart of the Viking kingdom of York within the wider Danelaw. From this stronghold, they launched further campaigns, entrenched themselves in local politics, and oversaw the Norse-influenced administration that lasted almost without interruption for 80 years. Throughout these decades, control of York passed between various Viking rulers, some local to England, and others with ties to Norway or Denmark. While the Anglo-Saxons occasionally recaptured the city, such victories were fleeting. The Vikings often returned quickly, exploiting divisions among the English kingdoms. These brief changes in power did little to challenge the long-term reality. York was a Norse city, and their presence shaped Northumbria's politics and culture. The turning point came in the mid-10th century. By then, the fractured Anglo-Saxon kingdoms had transformed into a unified realm under the rule of the kings of Wessex. This unity was not born overnight. It began decades earlier under Alfred the Great, whose defence strategies against the Danelaw preserved Wessex from Viking conquest. His successors, Edward the Elder and Athelstan, expanded English control northward, winning key battles and forcing submission from territories once under Norse rule. These efforts laid the groundwork for the kingdom strong enough to challenge York directly. Meanwhile, the Vikings themselves were weakened from within. York's rulers were rarely secure. Rival claimants from Scandinavia and Ireland, combined with shifting royalties among local leaders, led to frequent changes of power. This instability meant the Vikings could no longer count on presenting a unified defence if attacked. Worse still, York's network of support within the Danelaw had been steadily dismantled. As English kings reclaimed one territory after another, York grew more isolated, its strategic advantage fading. By the early 950s, the political climate in Northumbria itself was shifting. Many of its nobles, tired of decades of instability under the Norse rule, began to see the English crown as a part of a greater security. When King Edred of England turned his attention to York, he met less resistance than many had expected. In 954 CE, the Northumbrians expelled their last Viking ruler, Eric Bloodaxe, and yielded to Edred's authority. It was the culmination of nearly a century of slow attrition, diplomacy, and optimism. The reoccupation of York was made possible by three interwoven factors: the political unification of England under a single monarchy, the chronic instability within Viking leadership, and gradual erosion of York's territorial support. The fall of Eric Bloodaxe marked not just the end of Viking rule in Northumbria, but the completion of England's transformation from the patchwork of rival kingdoms into a single, centralised state. York's long occupation was over, but its Norse legacy would endure in the city streets, culture, and memory for generations.